There is a kind of person who smiles too easily, speaks too righteously, and carries a light so bright it blinds you. They seem morally spotless, always composed, never angry, never petty. You might find yourself admiring them, or perhaps, if you're more perceptive, a cold shiver crawls down your spine instead, because beneath that pristine exterior something is missing. And that absence, my friends, is the most dangerous sign in a person, the complete denial of their own darkness. We all carry within us a shadow, that part of our psyche that holds everything we'd rather not see in ourselves. The envy, the rage, the need for control, the desire to dominate, to deceive, to manipulate, it's not evil in itself. In fact, it's simply human. But the real danger arises when a person claims they have no shadow, when they wrap themselves so tightly in an identity of goodness that they lose access to the darker half of their soul. That's when the shadow doesn't disappear. It acts out unconsciously, poisoning relationships, demonizing others, and eventually corrupting the very things that person believes they are protecting. History is filled with such examples. Those who persecuted in the name of purity, those who waged wars under the banner of righteousness. These were not monsters who knew they were doing wrong. No, they believed themselves to be paragons of virtue. They thought they were saving the world, while their disowned shadows ravaged it from behind a moral mask. You see, the most dangerous sign in a person is not anger, nor sadness, nor even cruelty. These are visible, they can be addressed. The real threat is invisible. It is the person who has buried their darkness so deep that it leaks into the world as unconscious harm. These are the people who manipulate under the guise of helping, who control in the name of order, who judge to protect truth, and who cannot see their own hand in the pain they cause. But we are not doomed to become this. The antidote is brutal honesty, not with the world, but with ourselves. It is the courage to look into the mirror and say, yes, there is something in me capable of betrayal, capable of cruelty, capable of hate. And then, instead of denying it, we explore it. We trace its roots, we understand its voice, and in that process we regain control. The darkness we integrate can no longer control us. This is not a journey of weakness, it is the highest form of strength. To carry our shadow consciously is to walk with integrity. It is to know what we are capable of and to choose the light anyway, not because we are blind to the dark, but because we've dared to face it. Such people are not perfect, but they are whole, and in a world starving for wholeness, they are rare and invaluable. Now, let us go deeper. It is not enough to simply acknowledge that the shadow exists. We must understand that most people unconsciously project it onto others. You hate the arrogance of your colleague because you deny your own pride. You condemn someone's aggression because you're afraid of your own power. You resent their freedom because you've imprisoned yourself in roles you never chose. The person who cannot bear to see a flaw in another is often the one most haunted by what they refuse to see within. This is why so many conflicts are not about what they seem. Families fall apart not because of what is said, but because of what is unspoken, what is buried. Nations clash not because of difference, but because of disowned shadows projected onto entire groups. A person who refuses to deal with their internal war inevitably creates war around them, and so the real revolution begins within. We must become warriors of the psyche, not to destroy our dark sides, but to reclaim them. What if your anger could fuel your boundaries? What if your jealousy could reveal what you truly desire? What if your fear was not weakness, but an invitation to grow? These emotions are not enemies. They are messengers. They are unhealed parts of ourselves asking for our attention. But make no mistake, this work is not easy. It will shatter the image you've built. It will call into question every mask you wear. You will lose parts of yourself, not the real parts, but the ones you constructed to be liked, to be accepted, to feel safe, and in their place something raw and real will emerge, something powerful. Something dangerous in the best possible way. because it is no longer ruled by unconscious forces. And when that happens, when you face your inner abyss and come out holding its hand instead of running from it, you become dangerous in a new way, not to others, but to the systems of delusion, repression, and projection that keep humanity asleep. You become a threat to falsehood, a voice that cannot be silenced, a soul that cannot be owned, and this, perhaps, is the ultimate sign of a truly awakened person. They no longer pretend to be pure, they aim to be whole. They do not divide the world into good and evil, they recognize both in themselves. And because of that, they act with wisdom, they speak with compassion, and they walk through the world not above it, but rooted in the deepest truth a human being can live. The greatest danger lies not in weakness, but in the illusion of virtue masking the shadow within. This is a deeply psychological truth, one that cuts through the facade of surface-level morality and reveals the complex, often contradictory nature of the human psyche. Weakness is visible, it humbles. It prompts reflection and correction, but the illusion of virtue, when worn like armor to protect one's self-image, does not invite humility. Instead, it creates a false sense of moral superiority. This illusion feeds the ego and inflates the belief that one is beyond reproach, incapable of wrongdoing, incapable of harm. That is precisely when the most harm is done. When someone sees themselves as inherently good, righteous, or morally above others, they become blind to the parts of themselves capable of destruction. This illusion acts as a psychological defense mechanism. Instead of facing their flaws, desires, or aggressive impulses, individuals project them outward. They create enemies out of others, villains in their narratives, so they don't have to see the villain within. This happens in subtle ways. A person obsessed with justice might become tyrannical in their relationships. Someone devoted to peace may become emotionally repressive and manipulative to avoid conflict. The danger isn't just that they are doing harm, it's that they genuinely believe they are doing good. The more they believe in their own moral infallibility, the less likely they are to question their motives, behaviors, or consequences. This creates a psychological blindness, a refusal to see how their light may actually be casting shadows onto others. People who fall into this illusion are often socially celebrated. They are seen as models of virtue, kind, disciplined, principled. But behind closed doors or buried deep within are urges, thoughts, and impulses they have never integrated. They do not disappear just because they're denied. Instead, they grow stronger in the unconscious, influencing decisions and reactions in indirect, often harmful ways. The illusion of virtue becomes a mask, and over time, even the person behind it forgets they are wearing it. They come to believe that what they project is who they truly are, but reality always finds a way to break through. Sooner or later, suppressed darkness leaks out through passive aggression, scapegoating, prejudice, or compulsive control of others for their own good. One of the clearest signs of this illusion is an extreme discomfort with ambiguity, a compulsive need to divide people, actions, or ideas into categories of good or bad, right or wrong, pure or impure. Such binary thinking is not a sign of moral clarity, but a symptom of disowned complexity. When someone can no longer tolerate the idea that good and bad coexist within them, when they externalize evil completely onto others, they lose the capacity for empathy and self-awareness. Their moral compass becomes skewed by self-protection. They can justify cruelty, exclusion, or punishment with the belief that they are protecting something sacred: truth, innocence, faith, justice. In their mind, the end always justifies the means. This becomes especially dangerous when such individuals hold influence or power as leaders, parents, teachers, or spiritual guides. Their unrecognized shadow can create psychological or even literal violence, often dressed in noble language. They may gaslight those who challenge them, labeling dissent as immoral or dangerous. Their inability to admit fault becomes a systemic problem. They begin to surround themselves with others who reinforce their virtue illusion and push away those who mirror back their unresolved darkness. This leads to echo chambers of moral self-congratulation environments where truth becomes secondary to the maintenance of a flawless self-image. True virtue is not the absence of flaws, it is the conscious, ongoing confrontation with them. The illusion of virtue, on the other hand, shuts the door on that confrontation. It silences the inner critic and glorifies the persona. But no one is just what they appear to be. We all carry parts of ourselves we fear, reject, or do not understand. Denying these parts does not make them go away, it makes them more dangerous. They become autonomous. They begin to act without permission, often when we are at our most vulnerable or triggered. And because the person under the illusion cannot recognize these behaviors as their own, they never take responsibility for them. This is why the illusion of virtue is far more dangerous than visible weakness. Weakness can be worked with. It brings with it a sense of openness, a willingness to learn, but the illusion of virtue shuts the door to growth entirely. It becomes a fortress of denial, protecting the ego while endangering the soul. The person trapped within it may never recognize the damage they cause, because they are too invested in believing they are above such things. And until that illusion breaks, often through crisis, loss, or the painful mirror of relationship, they remain a danger not only to themselves, but to everyone around them. Repression of the darker aspects of the self leads to destructive projection onto others. This psychological mechanism is one of the most insidious ways the unconscious mind protects itself, not by healing what is painful or unwanted, but by displacing it. When individuals cannot bear to acknowledge their own shadow, their aggression, envy, selfishness, or desire for control, they unconsciously attribute those traits to the people around them. This is not a conscious act of blame or accusation. It is something much deeper and more reflexive. The psyche, in its attempt to preserve a coherent self-image, offloads anything that feels incompatible with that image. What the self refuses to own, it sees in others, often in exaggerated, hostile, or distorted ways. Projection is born from repression. The qualities we repress do not vanish. They are simply buried beneath the surface of awareness, where they continue to influence perception, behavior, and emotional response. If someone represses their anger, they may become hyper-sensitive to any expression of anger in others, reacting with fear, judgment, or contempt. If a person denies their own manipulative tendencies, they may constantly accuse others of manipulation, seeing betrayal in even the smallest actions. This process is often invisible to the one projecting, but glaringly obvious to those around them. It fractures relationships, distorts reality, and reinforces isolation, all in service of keeping the darker truths of the self hidden from view. These projections become the fuel for interpersonal conflict. Because the repressed emotion or trait is disowned, it cannot be addressed or resolved. Instead, the person becomes locked in a cycle of externalizing the problem. This dynamic is particularly dangerous in close relationships, where one person may scapegoat another, blaming them for feelings or behaviors they cannot tolerate in themselves. In family systems, this often manifests in the identified patient, one member of the family who is labeled as the source of dysfunction, when in truth, they are carrying the shadow material that the rest of the system refuses to acknowledge. The same dynamic plays out in workplaces, communities, and even entire nations. When an individual is unaware of their projections, their world you becomes increasingly polarized. There is me, the good, innocent, righteous self, and them, the dangerous, corrupt, inferior other. This split creates a false sense of safety by compartmentalizing the world into predictable categories. But this safety is an illusion. The more someone projects, the less integrated they become. They lose touch with their full range of emotions and motivations. Their reactions become reactive and disproportionate because they are not responding to the real situation, they are responding to their own unconscious material reflected back at them. What they see out there is not what is, but what they have refused to see in here. In many cases, this form of projection escalates into dehumanization. When groups of people collectively repress their shadows, especially when guided by a charismatic leader or ideology, they begin to demonize an external enemy. This enemy becomes a container for all the traits the group denies in itself: cruelty, perversion, weakness, violence. Wars have been waged, genocides justified, and entire populations ostracized because of projected fear and hatred. It is not that the other group had no faults, but that those faults were magnified and mythologized to avoid confronting the same capacities within the self. On a personal level, projection also stunts growth. A person who constantly sees the problem in others cannot develop true self-awareness. They remain in a childlike psychological state, where blame replaces responsibility. Emotional maturity requires the ability to say, "This thing I see in you might also live in me." It demands the humility to question one's own reactions, to trace the emotional charge back to its source, and to be willing to own what is found there. Without this self-reflection, projections accumulate and solidify into rigid belief systems about the world, about relationships, about oneself. These beliefs create suffering because they are rooted in distortion rather than reality. Even more painful is that projection erodes intimacy. True connection requires vulnerability and authenticity. But projection places a false mask over both self and other. When you are interacting with someone through the filter of your unprocessed shadow, you are not seeing them as they are, you are seeing a part of yourself that you have disowned. As a result, the relationship becomes a battleground rather than a meeting ground. Conversations devolve into accusations, trust withers, and love becomes conditional. The tragic irony is that the qualities we project, even the negative ones, often hold deep meaning. They point to areas of unhealed pain, unmet needs, or unused potential. When left unexamined, these projections become weapons, but when faced with honesty, they become guides toward wholeness. The only way out of this destructive loop is to reverse the direction of perception. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with them?" we begin asking, "What is this reaction showing me about myself?" This shift requires courage. It asks us to step away from the comfort of blame and toward the discomfort of self-examination. But in doing so, we gain freedom not only from our projections, but from the unconscious patterns that keep us stuck. We begin to reclaim the parts of ourselves we once feared, and in doing so, we see others more clearly, love more fully, and live more honestly. True strength and moral integrity come from confronting and integrating the shadow, not denying it. The shadow, the part of ourselves made up of impulses, instincts, thoughts, and desires we consider unacceptable, is not evil by nature. It becomes dangerous only when it is ignored, repressed, or denied. Society teaches us from a young age what is good and what is bad. We are rewarded for being polite, obedient, and agreeable, and punished for being angry, selfish, or defiant. Over time, we learn to suppress these bad traits, hiding them not only from others, but from ourselves. But denying these parts of ourselves doesn't eliminate them. Instead, it drives them underground, where they gather force and erupt in unpredictable, often destructive ways. True strength does not lie in the absence of darkness, but in the conscious relationship we build with it. When a person faces their shadow honestly, they begin to see the full complexity of their humanity. They realize that morality is not a matter of rigid purity, but of responsibility. It's easy to follow rules when one has no awareness of the inner forces that challenge them. It is far more difficult and far more meaningful to make a moral choice when one has felt the pull of aggression, jealousy, or manipulation and chosen a different path. A person who has not faced their capacity for harm cannot claim true virtue because they don't yet know what they're capable of. Only by seeing our inner darkness clearly and refusing to be ruled by it do we earn the right to call ourselves strong. This strength is not aggressive or dominant. It is grounded, calm, and unshakable. It comes from knowing that nothing within us is foreign or monstrous, only misunderstood. Once the shadow is integrated, we stop fearing it. We no longer need to hide behind masks or pretend to be better than we are. We become more honest, more forgiving, and more courageous. Integrity flows naturally from this inner clarity. A person who has nothing to conceal is far less likely to lie, cheat, or betray. They no longer perform goodness for the sake of approval, nor do they condemn others for their flaws. Instead, they act from a deep alignment with truth, not because it's expected, but because it feels authentic. Integration also enhances emotional intelligence. When someone understands their own rage, they can recognize the signs of it in others without judgment. When they've explored their own need for validation, they stop resenting those who seek attention. This doesn't mean excusing bad behavior, but it does mean approaching others with empathy instead of moral superiority. It allows for clearer boundaries and deeper compassion at the same time. Because once we've met our own shadow, we are no longer shocked or disgusted by the humanity in others. We become less reactive, more responsive, and far more capable of dealing with conflict in constructive ways. Another aspect of this inner work is the reclamation of power. Much of what is labeled dark is actually a source of vitality and strength that has been misunderstood. Anger, when processed consciously, becomes assertiveness. Fear, when acknowledged, becomes caution and wisdom. Desire, when honored, becomes motivation. When people deny their shadow, they also deny these sources of power. They become passive, indecisive, or overly dependent on external validation. But when they integrate their shadow, they tap into a wellspring of energy that was previously locked away. They feel more alive, more whole. Their actions are driven less by fear or approval, and more by clarity and intention. This inner alignment also dissolves the need for perfection. People who have made peace with their shadow understand that growth is not about becoming flawless, but about becoming real. They stop chasing the illusion of being good enough and start focusing on being honest with themselves. This shift leads to greater authenticity and deeper connections with others. Vulnerability becomes a strength, not a liability. And in that space of shared humanity, trust can thrive. Moral integrity, then, is not about always doing the right thing, it's about being willing to see when you've done the wrong thing, take responsibility, and change. The journey of integrating the shadow is not a one-time event, but a lifelong process. As we evolve, new layers emerge. Each challenge, relationship, or crisis has the potential to reveal a new aspect of our hidden self. True strength is found in continuing to face these revelations with curiosity rather than shame. It is found in refusing to numb, escape, or project, and instead choosing to sit with what arises and understand it. People who do this work become anchors in a chaotic world. They are not perfect, but they are real. They are not saints, but they are trustworthy. And in a time when image often overshadows substance, this kind of integrity is both radical and deeply needed.